Hello and welcome to this channel where I talk about all things makeup related. I like to focus a lot on consumerism, especially anti-consumerism, which is a topic that I love to delve into a lot on this channel. So in keeping with that theme, I thought that we would talk about one of the more, I would say, high-profile new makeup releases of past weeks, and that would be the new Norvina number 4 palette. Norvina Volume 4. Yes, Norvina Volume 4 Pressed Pigments palette. This is the fourth of a series of palettes created by Norvina, who happens to be the president and creative force of Anastasia Beverly Hills. And I will say this, I have done a video before talking about the previous 3 Norvina palettes, so I'll put that video somewhere on the screen so you can see it yourself. But this video will be based solely on the 4th Norvina palette. I'll be sharing my likes and dislikes, pros and cons related to the palette, just my personal opinions of it. I will also be offering my musings as to why right now is the worst and the best time to be coming out with a high profile release such as this. And then finally, I'll be providing alternative versions for the Norvina Volume 4 palette featuring items from my own collection. So I've shopped my stash for items that I think can create like a similar vibe or a similar effect to what this palette is trying to create. So this palette is Norvina's version of a soft glam palette. It's supposed to be an everyday palette for a colorful makeup lover. Now, if you remember, the original soft glam palette was created by Norvina as a little bit of an ode to Anastasia Soar. It was supposed to be a collection of some of her favorite, more everyday colors, and in doing so, the company was able to launch a very well thought out, very popular version of a neutral palette. I personally think that it's one of the best neutral color schemes on the market in my opinion, and it currently stands as one of their more, I would say, popular palettes even now. So this is essentially supposed to be a colorful version of that palette based on Norvina's likes and dislikes when it comes to makeup. In contrast, the Norvina Volume 4 palette is, in my mind, such like a convoluted mixture of purples and neutral colors and a few pinks and just a yellow. It's kind of, for lack of a better word, a mess. Not to say that it isn't a curated color scheme, but when you start comparing it to the soft glam palette, which in my mind was such a brilliant, but very well done neutral palette. It looked so organized, and it wasn't even in the fact that it was neutral. It was the fact that it was a very well thought out, very well organized selection of colors. And then you have like this jumbled giant palette. I mean, it doesn't matter like how organized this palette looks. It is so many things in one palette, and I get that that's probably what they were going for, but especially with that addition of yellow for no apparent reason just plopped right into that palette, it looks very disorganized. It looks disheveled. I can think of a few looks that can be done with this palette, but when it comes to like the color story, I find it incredibly lacking. I can pick out like a few colors in this palette that I do like the looks of, chiefly the purples and the pinks. I really like those. However, side note, I don't really like the addition of the pressed glitters in there. I think that's a little bit random and a little bit uncalled for, but nevertheless, I really like the purples and the pinks. That's my favorite part of this palette, and I would definitely, I think, be able to wear those colors on an everyday basis personally. I also think that some of like the more neutrally pink colors are really pretty as well. However, and here is another graphic of the palette, you would have seen that I basically circled a bunch of colors in this palette, and that's because I decided to play a matching game, which I have been doing a lot, especially when it comes to larger palettes, because here's the thing with larger palettes, so much of the time they end up consisting of colors that essentially look so similar to one another. Not identical, but similar. And here's my opinion when it comes to that. I think that when you have so many just large palettes all the time coming out, you end up inevitably just coming up with very similar shades. Morphe has done this, and I feel like Norvina is now falling into this trap as well. In this palette alone, you have so many very similar shades. Again, not exact duplicates, but very similar shades, and I can probably bet that on the eyes they look almost identical, if not very, very similar. So that's another flaw that I found with this palette. I would say that about like a third to maybe half of it would consist of shades that are very similar and therefore unnecessary. I think that it would have been, I think, nicer to come up with like a more edited, a more like streamlined version of a palette that could have been marketed more convincingly as an alternative to the Soft Glam palette. Personally, I would have liked to see something that was similar in packaging and in concept to the Soft Glam, rather than just have like this giant monster of a palette that includes so many different colors in there, that some of them looking very similar and the entire color story looking so jumbled, in my personal opinion. Now on to my next point. Is this the right time for brands in general, not just Anastasia Beverly Hills and Norvina, but brands in general, to be coming out with high-profile releases at a time when most people, well, not most people, a lot of people can't afford to pay for them? This palette is not your cookie cutter $20, $30 eyeshadow palette. In fact, it is much more than that. It is priced at around $60, which for a lot of people, especially at a time when unemployment is at an all-time high and people are struggling and people are trying to pay for their necessities while social distancing, while trying to work, while trying to stay at home and provide for their families, and trying to dangle a release in front of their faces. If it was me, I would have postponed it. I do understand that this is a spring-themed palette and we're in May right now, so it makes sense. But if it was my company, and I know it's not, in my personal opinion, I would have postponed it, because I feel like Anastasia Beverly Hills is such like a cachet of a brand. So many people love Anastasia Beverly Hills, and so many people are clearly tempted by them. And I think that the people who work for the company are well aware of that. And in my personal opinion, they're taking advantage of many at a very vulnerable point for those people, financially and emotionally and even physically. And I kind of think that that's a little bit weird in my personal opinion. I will say this though, in some ways, if you look at it from the flip side, right now is the best time to be coming out with a gorgeous new palette, because it just allows people to have like a sense of, I would say, distraction, a sense of normalcy, to just have like a new makeup release to be excited about, to be inspired by. I hope that the people who are buying this palette are able to use it as a little bit of a distraction, as an opportunity to look forward to something that will bring them joy during a very difficult time. And yet on the flip side, I still hope that this palette hopefully isn't eliciting too much of a sense of FOMO within the people who literally cannot afford to buy a new makeup palette right now. So with that being said, I'm just going to go into the last portion of this video, and I'm going to be offering my alternatives for this palette. When it comes to new makeup releases, just in general, I don't try to look for duplicates of a certain makeup release. I try to look for alternatives. Basically, that involves me taking a look at the palette, thinking about what in that palette I find most appealing, and trying to come up with an alternative based on that information. So with this Norvina 4 palette, what I find really inspiring and what really draws me to it would be the pinks and the purples. So with that in mind, I decided to pull a few palettes from my collection that I really enjoy that happen to have pinks and purples in them that I really love. So the first of the alternatives would be the Festival palette by Juvia's Place. I do think that there is a small handful of shades in this palette that correspond to shades that are found in the Norvina 4 palette. This light gold is similar to one of the shades that is found in the Norvina palette. Similarly, this hot pink is also similar to several of the pinks found in the Norvina palette as well. This sort of like very beautiful foiled white shade has a similar look to one of the pressed glitters, but this is in my mind a little bit better because it's a foiled shadow as opposed to a pressed glitter. And then of course, what also really intrigued me about this palette would have been the purples. And when it came to the purples, I was kind of toying with sharing a few palettes in my collection that had a brilliant selection of purples in them, but then I decided to pull out a palette that I haven't basically shown you guys in a relatively long time, and that will be the Color Drain Vivid Pigments and Shadows palette. I love this thing. It is beautiful. It is, of course, a rainbow palette, so it has like a whole ton of shades in here. It has a pink, it has a yellow, but it also has a beautiful selection of purples. I love this palette. It's so beautiful. The quality is sublime. I think it's beautiful. I think it's gorgeous. And I think that the purples in this palette are a very good alternative to the purples that I personally am drawn to when it comes to the Norvina palette. Another alternative would be the Magic palette by Juvia's Place. Interestingly enough, this is a little bit of a unique color scheme, but I always find that this palette is so versatile, and I'm consistently able to use it to provide an alternative to newer palettes that I find on the market. But some of the more foiled pink shades are, in my mind, good alternatives to the shades found in the Norvina 4 palette. And then specifically, this really beautiful lilac shade is perhaps not a duplicate to the shades in the Norvina palette, but it is, in my mind, a similar shade. And I would say like a shade that matches the aesthetic of the Norvina palette. So when I think of the Norvina palette, I personally think of this color right here being a good, I'd say, corresponding shade that matches the springtime vibes of the Norvina 4 palette. So with that being said, these are 3 palettes in my collection that I think are good alternatives for the Norvina palette. Not that these are direct duplicates, of course. I just think that the shades that are found within these palettes are, in my mind, good alternatives for the Norvina palette. It might be a little bit obvious, but I personally am not going to be getting the Norvina 4 palette myself because, of course, I have some alternatives for it in my own collection, in my personal opinion, and I'm just not interested in spending money on makeup right now. In my personal opinion. That's where I'm going. But with that being said, thank you for watching till the end of this video. I'm very glad that you devoted even a little bit of your day to watching my channel, to watching my content. I really appreciate it and enjoy your company, and I will see you all in tomorrow's video. Bye.